My name is Megan Hayes, and I never thought I would have to start a story that way, almost like I am reintroducing myself to the world, because somewhere along the line, people stopped seeing me as someone worth introducing. I spent 17 years of my life as a firefighter, 17 years of smoke, of sirens, of holding strangers' lives in my hands, while the heat gnawed at my own, and when I walked away from it, when I decided I could not keep burning myself up for everyone else, it was like a curtain came down, and the few people who should have known me best decided I was invisible. My family had always been proud of my younger brother, Lucas. He was the one who followed the map exactly, who hit all the markers on the road that everyone praises. He became a doctor, earned titles and letters after his name, bought the nice suits, posed for pictures with a glass of champagne in his hand, and a kind of easy charm that made him look born for bright rooms. Our parents beamed every time his name was mentioned. They hung his awards in frames, talked about his promotions over the dinner table, and filled holiday newsletters with his accomplishments. When it came to me, they never asked about the nights I spent on roofs, while the world was on fire under my boots. They never asked about the people who held onto my hands in the dark, waiting to be pulled out, or how many times I came home with burns on my shoulders. The day I resigned, there was no question in their voices, no curiosity. There was just that small shrug in their eyes, that silent judgment that maybe this proved I had never been good enough, that I couldn't handle it. They didn't know that my decision was not about quitting, but about surviving. I thought when I left, I would find rest, but what I found was a strange kind of erasure. It is a peculiar thing to feel yourself fade out of your own life. I live now in Nashville, far from the South Carolina streets, where my last name used to mean something, and I keep to myself. In my family's house, my name is still spoken, but not like a person who is present. It is spoken like a cautionary tale, a soft whisper of someone who once tried, someone who could not keep up. Every holiday is the same stage, the same table. They look at me like I am a ghost in work boots, sitting next to Lucas, who carries the future in a polished suit. I think they forget that I had a life before that, a life built out of fire and grit, that there are people walking around breathing right now, because I refuse to leave them behind. They forget that, because I never said it out loud. I never told them what it cost me. Maybe that is my mistake. Maybe I believed that if you worked hard enough, if you put yourself in the fire for long enough, they would see it without you having to say it. Turns out they don't. Turns out silence looks a lot like failure from the outside. I suppose that is why I am talking now, because after so long of being reduced to a shadow in my own family, I realized that if I do not speak my own story, someone else will keep writing it for me. I do not blame Lucas for being who he is. He has always been confident, always been the one who knows where he is going. And in some ways, I think it is easier for them to pin their pride on him, because his life looks so simple from the outside. Degrees, hospitals, white coats, steady paychecks, pictures with polished smiles. My life is messier. It smells of smoke even years later. It does not fit into their vision of success, so they pretend it does not exist. What none of them know, not even Lucas, is that every scar on my body has a name, and every burn has a date. I wake up some mornings, and for a second I am back there, feeling the ceiling groan above me, and wondering if I will make it out before the floor gives way. I see a stranger's eyes go wide as I reach for them, and I know that if I stop, if I give up, they die. That is who I was. For 17 years. It is still who I am. But now I live with the part no one talks about. How to rebuild when no one is looking. I am telling you this because from the outside it looks so simple, as if I just walked away one day and nothing followed me. But the truth is, when I left the department, everything that I was followed me right out the door, and when I went home, hoping to find the comfort of the people who raised me, I found that I was no longer someone they could talk about with pride. It is not that they said cruel words. It is in the pauses, the way they ask about Lucas first, the way they glance at my hands and then past me, as though I have already been catalogued as the one who didn't make it. And I thought for a while, maybe I could live with that. Maybe I could just accept my place on the edges. But lately, I am starting to understand that there is a difference between being humble and being erased. There is a difference between stepping back because you choose to and being pushed back because they think you don't belong. This story I am about to tell is not just about the fires I walked into. It is about the quiet afterward. It is about the long, drawn-out moments when you realize the people you love the most may never see the battles you have fought. It starts with me, sitting at a dinner table, watching my brother's life glow like it is lit from the inside, and realizing that no one at that table even remembers that I once carried people out of burning buildings. They only remember that I am the one who walked away. And if you want to know how I ended up here, telling you all of this, it begins with that feeling of being both present and absent, seen and not seen, a hero to strangers and a disappointment to my own blood. My name is Megan Hayes, and this time I am not letting anyone else decide who I am. The night of the fire in the Appalachian Mountains is something I have never been able to fully put into words, but it has never left me. It was the summer of 2018, the kind of summer where the air itself feels like kindling, and by the time we arrived, the cabin was already an inferno eating its way up into the trees. The sound was the first thing that hit me, that deep animal roar of wood collapsing under its own heat. And then the smoke came, so thick it felt like we were swimming in it, instead of breathing. I remember pulling my mask tight against my face, feeling the straps cut into my cheeks, and forcing my way inside where every surface was glowing and every breath was borrowed. There were 8 people trapped, a family who had come to the mountains for a weekend of quiet. I did not stop to think about how many times the roof groaned above me, or how my boots stuck to the floorboards, where the fire had melted varnish into glue. I only thought about the next body, the next set of hands I could pull toward the door. By the time I got to the last man, the ceiling was already dropping pieces of itself in burning chunks, and one of them caught my left shoulder. Pain didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the weight of him in my arms as I dragged him out into the night. And then the air hit me, cold and open, and I fell to my knees still clutching his jacket, while the cabin behind us exploded into a shower of sparks. That was the last thing I remember, before everything went black. When I woke up in the hospital, my arms and shoulders wrapped in a lattice of bandages. I could not move my left hand. The skin grafts came later, weeks of them, while I learned how to hold a fork again, how to twist the lid off a bottle, how to do all the small things I had taken for granted when my hands were strong. The news ran the story for a while. Firefighter rescues 8, collapses from smoke and burns, spends 11 months recovering. They called me a hero for a few days, maybe a few weeks. But news cycles are short, and the world has other disasters to pay attention to. By the time I was discharged, the cameras were gone, and my phone was silent. No one came to see me. My parents didn't fly out. My brother sent a single text that said, "Glad you're okay. Let us know if you come back home." I read it once and turned the screen over. What no one saw was that after 17 years of running into fire, that night had taken the last piece of me that could keep going. There was nothing left to give. When the doctors finally cleared me to leave, I handed in my badge. No speeches, no goodbyes. I mailed it back to the department from a bus station because I couldn't stand to walk through the station doors as a visitor instead of part of the crew. I went south after that, away from the mountain roads and the empty, charred cabin that haunted my dreams. Nashville seemed like a place far enough from the ruins of who I had been, but close enough to something new. I found a small apartment above an auto shop, the kind of place where no one asked questions, and the nights were filled with the sound of traffic instead of wind in the trees. I started teaching kids. It began with a few safety lessons at a community center and grew into full courses: fire escape plans, survival skills, first aid. My classes aren't glamorous. We practice how to crawl low when there's smoke, how to make a splint from a t-shirt, how to use your voice to keep people calm in chaos. Some of the kids think it's boring at first, but after a few weeks you can see the way their eyes change, the way they start to realize that knowing what to do can make you brave. Those classes saved me in a way nothing else could. They gave me something to hold on to when I didn't know what to do with all the knowledge of danger that was left inside me. And in those classrooms, no one knows that I was once on the front page of the paper. No one knows about the medal the state mailed me, or the check for $250,000 that came with it, an award for heroism that I never told a soul about. That envelope sits untouched in a fireproof box in my apartment. The medal is there too, a dull piece of metal on a ribbon that has started to fade. I've opened the box a few times, looked at the neat handwriting on the check, and closed it again. It is not that I don't need the money. It is that using it would feel like I was cashing in the only thing I have left from those years, the only thing no one else can take away. My family doesn't know about it, because I never told them. They would only see the number, not the nights it represents. To me, it is a weight, a silent reminder of everything I gave and everything I lost. Some nights, I sit at my table and hold the medal in my palm, tracing the edges with my thumb until the metal warms from my skin. I remember the faces of those 8 people, how their voices cracked as they coughed in the cold air when we finally made it out. I wonder if they think about that night as often as I do. I wonder if they remember my voice, telling them to stay low, to hold on. In those moments, I feel a strange mix of pride and sorrow, like 2 sides of the same coin spinning endlessly in my chest. And when the sun rises, and I put the medal back in its box, I lock it away, not because I want to forget, but because I need to keep at least one part of my life safe from the weight of everyone else's expectations. The restaurant in Charleston that night smelled like garlic and expensive wine, the kind of place where every tablecloth is crisp and white, and you know the menu doesn't bother listing prices, because anyone who has to ask shouldn't be there. My parents love places like that, places where they can glow just by sitting at the table and bask in the reflected shine of my brother Lucas. The moment I walked in, I felt the difference in the air, the way conversations slowed for a beat before smoothing over again, like ripples closing over a stone. Lucas stood in the center of it all, tall, clean-cut, his suit tailored, shaking hands with one guest after another, as if the whole night had been designed around him, which it had. This dinner was to celebrate the hospital's newest promotion for him, and I was only here because my mother had sent me a text saying it was family, and that I shouldn't embarrass them. I found a seat at the edge of the table, and before I could even open my mouth, a cousin leaned over and asked me what I was doing these days, if I was still playing around with those little camping classes. There was a laugh around the table. polite but sharp in its way, like they couldn't imagine that what I did could matter. I smiled because that's what I've learned to do in moments like this. Just let the wave pass over me. For the rest of the night, I sat there and listened to the stories about Lucas's brilliance, about the surgeries he'd assisted with, about how proud they all were of him. No one asked about me. They didn't have to. I wasn't the reason anyone had come. I was the shadow in the corner, the extra place setting. Halfway through dessert, Lucas leaned across the table and looked at me like he was about to hand me a gift. "There's a gala next month," he said. "A first responders appreciation thing at the hospital. You should come. It'll be nice to have you there." The words hung there, soft and casual, but I could feel the edges of them, like they weren't about me at all. It was an invitation that sounded like an obligation. He wanted me to be there, because it made his story look good. I nodded anyway, because sometimes it's easier not to fight. The rest of the table smiled politely. Some even clapped lightly on the table, as though just agreeing to be present was an achievement. I didn't say much for the rest of the meal. Later that night, back in the little guest room at my parents' house, I sat awake staring at the ceiling and thought about why I always came back. Maybe it was hope, that small and foolish part of me that still wanted to believe I could sit at a table with my family and feel like I belonged. But the truth is, as I sat there in that chair watching Lucas glow, I realized I had never been invited to belong in their version of the world. They had already decided who I was, and that was that. The night of the gala came, and I almost didn't go. I stood in front of my closet for a long time, staring at the handful of dresses I owned, the ones that felt like costumes when I put them on. In the end, I chose my old fire jacket. It still smelled faintly of smoke even after all these years, but it was the truest thing I owned. I thought about leaving it at home, because Lucas had mentioned that his boss would be there, and that maybe I should look polished. But I couldn't do it. I wanted to walk into that room as myself. The ballroom was glittering, all chandeliers and flags and tables covered in glass and silver. The sound of a string quartet floated in the background, and the air was heavy with perfume and ambition. I kept to the edges of the room, moving slowly between groups of people I didn't know, holding a glass of water like a shield. People glanced at me and then looked away. It wasn't unkind, just the way people do when they can't place someone in their mental hierarchy. And then, just as I thought maybe I could slip out unnoticed, a man stopped mid-step. He turned toward me like something had pulled him back, and his eyes locked on mine. He was tall, silver-haired, with a presence that came not from arrogance, but from the kind of authority that life carves into a person. He took a step closer, studying me. "Are you Megan Hayes?" he asked quietly, and I nodded, not sure where this was going. "I'm Nathan Cole," he said, and for a moment my mind blanked. "You pulled me out of that cabin fire in 2018, in the Appalachians." I froze. My throat went dry. It had been years since anyone had mentioned that fire. Years since anyone had looked at me like they remembered what happened. "You kept saying, 'Don't quit. Stay with me,'" he said softly. "I never forgot that. I've been trying to find you ever since." Before I could answer, he turned slightly, lifting his hand as if to steady himself, and called for attention. The room quieted around him, conversations falling into a hush as he walked toward the stage. I stayed where I was, not sure if I was dreaming. When Nathan began to speak, his voice carried easily over the room. He thanked everyone for coming, thanked the hospital for their work, but then his tone shifted. "Tonight," he said, "I want to talk about a different kind of hero. Someone who doesn't wear a white coat or stand at a podium, Someone who saved my life and then disappeared. I felt every eye in the room turn to follow his gaze, and it landed on me. In 2018, I was trapped in a cabin in the Appalachians. I thought I was done for, and then she came in through the smoke and dragged me out. I found out later that she saved 7 other people that same night, and she nearly lost her own life doing it. She never took credit, never told anyone what she did, but she's here tonight. My stomach knotted as he said my name, Megan Hayes. The room erupted in a low wave of murmurs, and I stood frozen, unable to move, while the truth I had carried alone for so long finally spilled into the open. My brother's face, across the room, went pale, and my parents stared at me as though they were seeing me for the first time. I didn't bow or wave. I just nodded, because for the first time in years, I felt like I didn't have to explain who I was. Someone else had already done it. After that night, everything changed. Or at least, that was how it looked at first. For years, I had been the invisible one at family dinners, the one whose chair felt like a formality. But after the gala, I started getting phone calls. My mother called the next morning, her voice bright like sunshine, telling me how proud she was, how she wished they had known about all those years, all those rescues. She said my father had been telling everyone at his office about what Nathan Cole said, and she asked if I could come over for dinner so that we could celebrate properly, just the family. It was strange to hear that tone from her, almost like she was trying on new words she wasn't used to saying. Then came a text from Lucas, asking if I wanted to meet for coffee and talk. My father even left a voicemail, his voice thick, like he was trying to hold something back, saying he didn't realize how much I'd carried alone, and how he wanted to make it right. For a brief moment, I thought maybe something had shifted, like a door that had been locked. My whole life was finally opening. I said yes to the dinner. I told myself I could give them one more chance, because a part of me, no matter how much I try to bury it, still wants to believe that they see me. The dinner was set like a celebration. There was a banner taped across the entryway that said "Our Hero," painted in red letters that had probably been done by my mother's hand. The table was covered with flowers, and the smell of my favorite mushroom soup drifted in from the kitchen. For a few hours, it felt like I was a child again, sitting there as they asked me to tell the story of the fire, asking questions they had never bothered to ask before. For a while, it was nice to feel like they actually wanted to hear me, to let the words pour out of me without wondering if I was boring someone or taking up too much space. Lucas listened more than he spoke, which is rare for him, and my mother's eyes shone with something that looked almost like tears. My father said he couldn't believe I had been through all that alone. He said he wished he had been there. It was like a dream, the kind of night I used to imagine when I was younger, when I thought that maybe if they could just see me for who I was, everything would be different. But even as the warmth of it surrounded me, I could feel something else under the surface, a waiting. It came in glances between my parents and Lucas, in the careful way my mother's voice tightened before she spoke again. When the plates were cleared and the dishes sat stacked on the counter, my mother folded her hands on the table and leaned toward me. She started softly, saying she was so proud of me, that the world finally knew what she had always hoped was true. Then, like a pebble dropped into still water, she asked about the money. "That grant they gave you," she said gently. "You still have it, don't you?" Lucas added quickly that he had a research proposal at the hospital, something that could make a real difference. But funding was tight. They weren't asking for all of it, just a portion, he said. Something to help get it started. The words were polite, but they landed like a weight. All the warmth drained out of me in an instant. It wasn't about me. Not really. It was about what I had that they didn't. I sat there listening, as my mother explained that it was a chance for the family to be part of something big, something meaningful, like they could finally be proud of all of us together. They talked about how it would be a way to turn what happened to me into something good for everyone, and in that moment, I understood that the door hadn't opened for me. It had opened for the money. The hero they were so eager to celebrate was just a new way to get to the thing I had been keeping locked away all these years. It wasn't pride. It was opportunity. I put my hands on the table and told them no. My voice didn't rise. It was steady and low, but I could see the way it rippled through the room. Lucas frowned, a tight little crease forming between his eyebrows, and my mother blinked like she hadn't expected me to say it out loud. I told them I had carried that fire and its cost by myself for years, and that money wasn't a family account. It wasn't theirs to plan around. My father said I was being selfish, and Lucas said I was letting stubbornness ruin something that could be good. I didn't answer. I just stood up, thanked them for the meal, and walked out. The air outside was cool, and as I stood in the driveway, I could still hear the murmur of their voices through the walls, trying to figure out how I had turned into someone they couldn't convince. Driving home, I realized that whatever had seemed like love in the aftermath of that gala was just another performance, another way of asking without having to say the words directly, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something harder than disappointment settle inside me. I had hoped that maybe the truth would be enough, that maybe being seen at last would change something between us. But that night proved what I think. Deep down, I have always known. Sometimes people don't want to know you. They just want what you can give them. I thought that walking away from that dinner would be the end of it, but a few nights later, there was a knock on my apartment door, and when I looked through the peephole, I saw Lucas standing there. He wasn't polished like he had been at the gala. No crisp shirt. No easy grin. His tie was loose around his neck, and his shoulders were slumped like something heavy had been sitting on them for a long time. I opened the door because he was my brother, because some part of me still believed that blood meant you had to at least hear someone out, and he walked past me like he had already decided what he was going to say. He sat in the only chair in my living room, the one with a tear in the arm, and told me the truth. It came out in pieces at first, like he had to fight his pride to say the words. He said there were debts, a lot of them. It started with poker games, private tables in Las Vegas. Then it grew into something he couldn't manage. He thought he could win enough to fix it, and when that didn't happen, he borrowed. Now the people he owed weren't just friends. They were the kind of people you don't cross. I sat there listening, not interrupting as he explained that if he couldn't pay it back, he would lose everything: his residency, his career, his reputation. And then, after all that, he looked at me and said what he had come for. He wanted my help. 50,000, maybe more if I could, just enough to get him out of the hole so he could rebuild. He said he would pay me back, that he would make it right, that family helps family. I don't know if he realized how much it hurt to sit there and hear that the only time he ever came to me for anything was when he needed money. I asked him if I were still the sister who ran summer programs for kids and barely scraped by, if I didn't have that grant tucked away in a lockbox, would he be here now? Would he still be asking for my help? He didn't answer. He just looked away, and that was enough. I told him no, not because I didn't care, but because every part of my life has been built on dragging myself out of places I was never meant to survive. I couldn't let him pull me back into a fire I didn't set. His face changed then, like something cold had taken the place of the brother I remembered. He stood up without a word and left. The next morning, there was a post on a local forum, a story about a firefighter who hoarded her hero money while her own family suffered. There were no names, just enough detail for anyone who knew us to put the pieces together. I ignored it at first, told myself it was a coincidence. But then, there were more. Social media posts, whispers from old family friends, words like selfish, cold, ungrateful. People who didn't know me started writing about me like I was a villain in someone else's story. The weight of it grew quickly. Parents at the survival center started calling, saying they weren't sure they wanted their kids learning from someone who treated her family that way. I could feel the way people looked at me differently when I went to the grocery store, the subtle change in the cashier's voice, the way conversations would stop when I walked into the gym. It's a strange kind of loneliness, the kind that comes not from being alone, but from being surrounded by people who think they know you because of something they read. Then one night, I came home from class and found the door to my apartment unlocked. Inside, drawers had been pulled open, and papers were scattered across the floor. The little fireproof box, where I kept the medal and the envelope, had been pulled out from under my bed and pried open. The check was still there, but some of my documents were gone. Old hospital records, some letters, anything that could be twisted into proof of what they wanted to say about me. On the table, written in marker on the back of an envelope, was a single sentence. If you don't know how to share, someone else will decide for you. My hands shook so badly I had to sit down. I called the police, and they came and asked questions, but there were no fingerprints, no signs of forced entry. They suggested maybe I had forgotten to lock the door. I knew better. I could see his shadow in every corner of that room, the same shadow that had been standing outside my door the night he asked for money. After that, it was like the air changed. My phone rang constantly, numbers I didn't recognize, voices that all blended together in the same tone of polite insistence. People saying they wanted to help me rebuild my image, people saying they could make it all go away if I just supported this charity or that project, people who introduced themselves as family friends and then asked for loans. Each call left me feeling smaller. I stopped answering. I stopped sleeping. I went from room to room in my apartment like a stranger, checking the locks twice before bed, listening for sounds that weren't there. And still, even with all of that, I couldn't shake the thought that Lucas was waiting for me to crack, that this was all just a slow push toward the edge, a way to make me so tired and scared that I would finally give him what he wanted. But the thing is, fire teaches you something about yourself. It teaches you that when the heat comes, you don't run. You hold on. You keep breathing even when the smoke tries to take that from you. And that's what I did. I held on. I didn't give him a dime. And every time I looked at that torn envelope, with those ugly words written across it, I reminded myself that there are some things worth more than family approval. Sometimes the only thing you have left is your own boundary, and once you give that away, you have nothing left at all. It was Nathan who found me at my lowest, at a small cafe near my apartment, where I sat with my hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee that I couldn't bring myself to drink. He slid into the chair across from me without asking, and for a while, we just sat there in silence, the quiet hum of the place filling the space between us. Then, he placed a folder on the table, thick with papers and photos, and said that he had hired someone to look into what had been happening to me. Inside was everything I hadn't been able to prove. Copies of forged signatures on withdrawal slips, surveillance images of Lucas letting a man into my building the night my apartment was broken into, the original post from that forum traced back to his work computer. I stared at the evidence, my hands shaking as I turned each page, and for the first time in months, I felt something solid forming under my feet again. Nathan looked at me with the kind of patience that only someone who has been pulled back from the edge can have, and told me that I had a choice. I could stay silent and let this keep eating me alive, or I could finally stand up and tell the truth, even if it meant tearing apart the last ties I had to the family that had already turned their backs on me. For a long time, I thought about all the years I had swallowed my anger, all the times I had chosen to stay quiet to keep the peace, and I realized that it had never brought peace at all. So I told him, yes, I wanted to do it. The weeks that followed were a blur of meetings and forms and court dates that felt like stepping into another fire. Only this one burned in slow motion. Lucas tried to talk to me once before the hearing, standing outside the courthouse with that same smooth look he always carried when he wanted something. But I didn't stop. In that room, for once, I wasn't the one on trial for not being enough. The judge listened as the evidence was laid out. The money he had taken under fake pretenses, the accounts he had opened in my name, the lies he had spun online to turn strangers against me. Every document, every photo, every word was a spark that caught and built into something too large for him to smother. My parents sat in the front row, silent, their faces pale as they listened. By the time it was over, Lucas could no longer hide behind charm. The court ruled in my favor. He was ordered to repay what he had taken, stripped of his position at the hospital for 2 years, and required to enter counseling for the gambling that had dragged him down. As the gavel came down for the final time, I felt something inside me unclench. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't revenge. It was just the release of a weight I had been carrying for far too long. After the trial, I went back to Nashville, back to the quiet apartment over the auto shop, and sat with the check and the medal that had been hidden for so many years. For a while, I thought about tearing the check up, about locking the box forever, and walking away from everything it represented. But then I realized that those years didn't have to end in silence, that money was a gift I had been too tired and too proud to use, but I could turn it into something better. That's how the Phoenix Skills Center was born, a place for kids and teenagers who had been told all their lives that they weren't enough, a place where they could learn what to do when everything around them falls apart. We teach them how to build fires safely, how to stop a bleed, how to find their way out when the smoke is thick and the exits are unclear. And sometimes, if they want to listen, I tell them a little bit about what it means to stand in the middle of a fire and keep going anyway. Slowly, the students who had left when the rumors started began to come back. Their parents came too, some with awkward apologies, some with letters they left folded in my hand. One boy hugged me after class and told me he wanted to be a firefighter because of me. And in that moment, I felt something heal that I hadn't even realized was still open. In time, even my parents began to understand. They came to see the center one day. No grand speeches, no excuses, just quiet eyes looking at the place I had built. My father said he was proud. My mother wrote a letter, a simple 1-page note that said they finally saw me. I don't know what will become of us, whether we will ever be close again, but I know that for the first time in my life, I don't need their approval to feel whole. Nathan comes by often, bringing coffee and sometimes breakfast for the kids. We stand on the porch and watch them run drills, their voices bright and fearless in the morning air, and he tells me that I pulled him out of a fire twice now, once with my hands and once with my heart. There are moments, when the sun is low and the laughter echoes across the yard, that I can feel the life I almost lost settling back into me, and when people ask me if I'm still scared of fire, I tell them the truth. Everyone is. But if you learn to understand what burns, if you know how to stand in the heat without losing yourself, then sometimes the fire stops being an enemy. Sometimes it becomes the thing that shows you who you are. I used to think my life ended the night I walked away from the department. Now I know that was just the beginning.